Hey everyone, Professor I here. I want to talk to you now about MLA Citation. It is super important to your success in this class that you develop a good understanding of MLA. And so hopefully you have your handy dandy little Siegel handbook with you, and you can sort of eventually follow along with me. It's important to look through this section on MLA. It's the green section, MLA Style, beginning on 119, and you want to skim through there and read through there. It's a large section, but you need to get the lay of the land. So let's kind of start at the beginning, and the beginning is sort of to consider what that acronym MLA stands for in the first place. You may or may not know that it actually stands for the Modern Language Association. And so MLA Style is an agreed upon system by which we cite our sources. We tell our readers, here's where I got this information. Here's who wrote or said this quote, right? In our academic papers. And so as you can guess through the acronym Modern Language Association, the MLA is not just a system of citing, but it's an actual organization. And they have a website, mla.org. And so most college English professors belong to the MLA. A lot of high school English teachers, language arts teachers belong as well. So why does it matter that we learn to tell the difference between what is considered to be a good, credible source by the MLA and a bad, unreliable source? Why can't we just use whatever kinds of sources we want in our college papers and not worry about it? Well, the obvious answer is that if we do that, we might wind up using a source that looks credible, but it's actually filled with false information, and we're perpetuating that false information to our readers. And in the age of fake news, we have to especially be careful about that. So we've established what MLA is, why it matters that we learn to tell the difference between a solid, reliable source and one that might not be so reliable. Now here's the next question. Why do we have to have this agreed upon method for how to cite those sources? Cite, C-I-T-E, not S-I-G-H-T or S-I-T-E, C-I-T-E, as in citation, C-I-T-A-T-I-O-N. So attribute them to the person who originated them. Well, we need that agreed upon system, because if we didn't have it, we'd each be doing it in our own way, and we might not know what anyone else meant, right? So if you're a musician, if you read music, you know that music is its own language. And when you look at a piece of sheet music, you have certain symbols and signs that would tell anyone anywhere from any part of the world who could read music how to play that piece. And so citation is very much like that. It allows us to all be on the same page, and also an agreed upon system helps prevent us from doing that thing that we most of all do not want to do in college writing, that most egregious of errors that could cause us to get expelled, and that is plagiarism, right? So let's talk just for a minute about plagiarism and what it is. There are actually two kinds. There's intentional and there's accidental. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, if I'm intentionally plagiarizing, I know that I'm cheating. I'm doing it on purpose. But if it's accidental, that means that I didn't intentionally set out to plagiarize, but maybe I just didn't understand the rules of the game, right? So it's important in 1010 that you learn the rules of the game. Very important. Because if you don't, then later on down the pike, and it could happen sooner rather than later, you could get accused of plagiarism, and that's a very, very serious situation to find yourself in. So what is plagiarism? We can define plagiarism as failing to do the following things. Failing to cite quotations and borrowed ideas. So in other words, quoting someone else or using someone else's ideas without giving them the credit for having originated those words or those ideas. The second thing, failing to enclose borrowed language in the quotation marks, right? So again, even if I tell my reader, so-and-so said the following, but I don't put those words in the quotation marks, technically I could be accused of plagiarism. And then thirdly, failing to put summaries and paraphrases into my own words. So if I summarize something someone else said, but I use their exact wording, and I don't cite that, and I don't let my reader know it's a direct quote by using the quotation marks, my reader automatically assumes that I'm the originator of those words or those ideas. So here are some scenarios that I'll throw out to you and see if you can figure out which one would constitute an instance of plagiarism. I've used someone else's exact words. I put the quotation marks around those words. But at the end of the sentence, I did not cite in parentheses the author's last name and the page number from which I found those words. Could I be accused of plagiarism? Yes, I could. I have used somebody else's exact words in my essay, and I even said these words were spoken by so-and-so, but I did not put the quotation marks around those exact words. Could I technically be accused of plagiarizing? Yes, I could. I have purchased a paper online. Well, duh. And students are getting more and more savvy about that sort of thing. Well, so are instructors. Technology works for us too. And we have a Turnitin system where we submit all your papers. They go through. And it will catch plagiarism. So, if you purchase a paper online, the chances are really good that you're going to get caught. I have reused a paper that I wrote for another class in this class without the permission of either instructor. Is that plagiarism? Yes, it is. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what? I can plagiarize myself? But here is the rationale behind that idea. In college writing, we want you to bring something new to the table every time you write an essay. And so if you're just recirculating the same thing that you just wrote in another paper, you're not really thinking in terms of the way we want you to think critically, right? You're just regurgitating the same thing. So when you reuse a paper in this class that you've already submitted in a previous class, technically you could be accused of plagiarizing. That does not mean that you can't use some of the same ideas or the same sources, right? But you don't want to submit the same paper. So now you know what plagiarism is, you know what the MLA is, and you know why it matters. The other thing you need to know is that finding sources and using citation is going to be a critical part of your academic career, literally from this moment on. Because you're going to have to do it in pretty much every class you ever take at a university or college. And that's just the way it is. Now is the time to learn how to do it correctly, because if you don't learn now, you'll pay big time later. And MLA is not the only form of citation that you'll be using. So for example, if you take a psych class or a sociology class, you'll use APA citation style, and that stands for American Psychological Association. There's an entire section in our little Seagull devoted to APA as well. And other types of citation includes Chicago style and CSE, which is a style used in the life sciences, the physical sciences, and yes, even mathematics. Now, it's rare that you would be citing in math in an undergrad class. If you were a grad student, you would be. I cited one time in a statistics class where we had to write a paper. But the point is that this is going to be part of your life, and you've got to learn how to navigate your way around, how to figure this out, right? And MLA is the style that we focus on in English because that's what English classes do, and that's what many of the humanity classes use. So I want us to think next about what's called in-text or parenthetical citation versus what's called a works cited page. And if you have skimmed through the section on MLA in your book, you already have an idea of what that means. So in-text citation means exactly what it sounds like it means. That's where you are creating a citation in the body of your text, in your paper. It's called parenthetical because you put it in parenthesis marks, right? So that happens within your paper. So when you quote from a source or you paraphrase from a source, at the end of it in MLA, in parentheses, you have the author's last name and the page number. There is never, ever a comma between the author's last name and the page number, unless you have more than one author or so, some sort of weird situation like that. If you just have one author and one page number, it's just going to be the author's last name and the page number. MLA is actually very simple in that way, right? And so that's in-text citation. Now, a works cited page is a separate page that appears at the very end of your paper, and it must appear on its own separate page. And up at the top, it says works cited. In MLA, it will never say references. It won't say work cited. It won't say anything but works cited, right? And you don't embolden it. You don't put it in great big huge letters and a big font. You just do it normally. And so here's what you need to get in your head and wrap your head around. So when you're reading a paper and you see a quote, and let's say that you are quoting from one of the texts that that we're reading in this unit. Let's say that you're quoting from Rabbi Kushner's What Really Happened in the Garden of Eden. And let's say that the quote that you're using is on page 3. I'm just throwing that out there. So at the end of the quote, in parentheses, you're going to have Kushner 3, right? And then the last parenthesis, and then your period. Period doesn't come at the end of the quote. It comes after the last parenthesis, because that's now the end of your sentence. So let's say that I'm reading your text and I'm not familiar with Kushner, and I read that quote and I'm like, wow, that's a really cool quote. I wonder where I too could find that text. So if I go to your works cited page, I'm going to be looking for Kushner, right? Because that's how you've cited an in-text correctly, Kushner, page number. So the purpose of that in-text citation is to direct your reader to the full information about that text within your works cited page. So I'm going to go to works cited in alphabetical order. So I'm going to read down until I get to K, Kushner, comma, Harold, period. And then the title of his piece, right? And so depending on what kind of source it is, my information that I'm going to list in my works cited entry might be different. So for example, if it is an article, then it might contain different information than if it's just a book. So again, the period goes at the end. So let me give you a little sample quote. Romantic poetry is marked by the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, unquote. And then in parentheses, Wordsworth, 363, end parentheses, period, right? So which words are my words and which words are Wordsworth's words? Try to say that 5 times in a row really fast. It's hard. Well, my words are romantic poetry is marked by the, and Wordsworth's words, I can't even say it, Wordsworth's words begin where my quotation marks begin. Spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, end quote, right? So now what if I wanted to take Wordsworth's words and paraphrase them into my own words? I still have to give him credit because he said it. I'm not going to use spontaneous, I'm not going to use overflow, I'm not going to use powerful, and I'm not going to use feelings because those are his words. And if I'm going to use those words, I just need to directly quote him with the quotation marks. I don't need to paraphrase. If I'm going to paraphrase, I got to change those words. Here's an example. Wordsworth believed that romantic poetry is characterized by emotions expressed in an unprompted manner. I don't need quotation marks because I'm not directly quoting him. But I do need, at the end, my citation because this is coming from his brain. And I don't need to take credit for it. Since I've named him in my sentence, Wordsworth, I don't have to put his name in the parentheses in the in-text citation. I can just have 363, the page number. But if I had not named him, if I had said, one writer believed that romantic poetry is characterized by emotions expressed in an unprompted manner, then at the end I'd have to say in the in-text citation, Wordsworth 363 in parentheses, period, right? So that's how that works. Now, what happens if you're citing a journal article in your works cited page, but you use the model or the formula for a textbook instead? Well, what happens is you're going to leave out important information that would not allow others to find that article, like the volume number, the issue number, things like that. Also, your instructor is going to catch the mistake and deduct points from your grade. Now, I had a friend in graduate school, and he was a great writer and a good student, but he was a procrastinator, and that is not something you want to do in graduate school at all. And we had a huge paper. All papers in graduate school are huge, but this one counted for the bulk of our grade, and he waited until the bitter end to really get into that paper. And he found the perfect source online. He found it. But he was running out of time, and he did not want to take his handbook. We didn't have the little Siegel. We had the Harbrace handbook at the time. But he didn't want to go to the trouble of looking up how to cite that source correctly on his works cited page. So he thought, you know what? I found this online. It originally came from a book. I'm just going to cite it like a book with one author, and the professor will never know the difference. Well, believe me, she knew the difference. Because here's the thing, the professors that stand in front of you are experts in their field. And this lady was teaching Brit-Lit, British literature, and that was her field of expertise. And it just so happened that she knew that this book, where he claimed to have found the source, that there were only 5 copies of it in the entire world, and that there was not any copy in the United States of America, because she had been on a campaign to get one of these rare books on loan to our university. She had actually been to London and put on her little white gloves so that she could take this rare book and hold it and love it. And this was like the highlight of this little woman's entire life, you know. She cherished that book. So when she saw that he had cited that on his works cited page like a book, she knew that he had to have found it online. So in a grad class, you're sitting at a table. There aren't many people in the class, you know, and you're all around the table. The professor's at the end. She had on these little spectacles, and she'd do this, and she'd point at you and tell you to come up after she'd sort of skimmed your paper. So she pointed at him, and he came up, and she says, "Young man, where did you find this source?" And he says, "Well, from a book." She goes, "Really? Did you go all the way to London to find the book?" He's like, "No, ma'am." She goes, "That's because you didn't find it in a book, did you? You found it online." And he's like, "Yes, ma'am." And she goes, "Well, I'm going to give you approximately," and I don't remember how much time she gave him, like 50 minutes or some kind of weird, you know, number, "to go wherever it is you people live," I'll never forget her saying that, "and correct this. Otherwise, I'm going to give you an F." So he was out the door, man, in a heartbeat, going and correcting that. I can tell you other stories when I taught at UTK, and I taught there for a long time before I came here, and I've been here a long time. But there was a student of mine in the library one day when I happened to be outside the library in tears. And she was a former student of mine, and when I asked her what was wrong, she told me that her I believe it was her history teacher, had accused her of plagiarism. And she said, Mrs. Ireland, you know me. You know that I would never intentionally plagiarize. It was an accident. But she said, he is absolutely nailing me to the cross over this. So it happens, and you must really be careful. So you want to look at this section that begins on 119. You'll see the directory to MLA Style. That sort of shows you how it's all laid out. And you'll see all of these different scenarios. So what do you do when you've named the author in your phrase? And we talked about that just now. That's on page 123. What do you do if the author needs to be named in the parentheses? Also on 123. And what if you're using a sacred text? Well, we may be writing about sacred text in paper 2. That's on page 127 of your little Siegel handbook. Shows you how to do that, how to create that in-text citation. And then you have a list of works cited, and it shows you how to create models for works cited entry. The sacred text model for works cited is on 147, and that may come in handy. It gives you all this information about formatting a research paper, in-text documentation, how to do that. And so your job is to figure out, okay, what kind of source do I have? Do I have a book with one author? Do I have a book with 2 authors? Is it a sacred text? Is it an online article? What am I citing? And then you want to look it up here and turn to that page number where the model is and follow that model exactly. Over on page 129, it gives you the core elements of a works cited page, and it explains to you how that is laid out. They're always in alphabetical order by author's last name. Now, there will be times where maybe you don't have an author's name, and that's not because you're too lazy to find it, but that's because maybe the author is anonymous. And so if that's the case, your next go-to, the thing that you'll use, will be the title. So in text, in your parenthetical or in-text citation, rather than the author's last name, you'd have the title and the page number. And your works cited sheet would begin with the title. Because your in-text citation and your works cited entry must begin in the exact same way. So for example, if I'm citing Harold Kushner, and in text I put Kushner 3, because that's the page number. And then you turn to my works cited, and I don't begin with Kushner, comma, Harold, but instead I begin with what really happened in the Garden of Eden, the title. My reader can't find that, because my reader's looking for Kushner. So I have to begin my works cited entry the same way that I begin my in-text citation. There is a wonderful sample paper at the very end of this chapter in your little Siegel handbook on MLA Style. And it begins on page 161. And you can see exactly how the paper's laid out. At the very end of it, there's a sample works cited page. And notice the indentation with a works cited entry. This is another thing that's very important. So the works cited entry is the opposite of a normal paragraph. Why does MLA do this? To make your life feel more complicated, right? So for example, in a normal paragraph, you indent the first line, but you do not indent any of the other lines in that paragraph. With a works cited entry, it's the direct opposite. You do not indent the first line of each entry, but you do indent the second and any remaining lines of each entry. 5 spaces or 1 tab. And so that's the way that works. Now there are some other things that you want to pay attention to. So for example, if you have a long quote that you want to use, then you want to use a block formatting, and that's different than what you would normally do in text when you use a quote. And things like that where we have some specific changes. Those are things that we can talk about for sure. What else do I want to tell you very quickly? the MLA template that you use for paper one, you can actually find those MLA templates on the PSCC Library's website. You'll find a whole section in MLA, and you can actually, just as you did with paper one, type paper two into one of those templates as well, and it will help you to make sure that you're doing things correctly. And I realize this is a lot of information. I apologize. There's no way to make MLA fun. I wish there was. There isn't. But it's something that you need to develop an understanding of, and there's no easy way to do it other than just buckling down and reading the material and getting it in your head, right? I do have a Kahoot for you this week that sort of goes along with all of this, and hopefully that'll help you a little bit. So thank you for your patience, extreme patience this week. See you soon.